And I think we are live now. Hello and welcome to Alfresco Tech Talk Live. This is episode 96, so we're getting close to episode 100. So I'm planning something special for that one. It's good to be back, and it's good to see you back on Tech Talk Live, Richard.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. So just to make introductions, my name is Alfresco, and together with me today I have Richard Esplin, Product Manager of Community Edition. Richard, do you want to just quickly introduce yourself and what you're doing for the people who don't know you already? I think most of the people know you.
So I've been at Alfresco for quite a while, and recently moved to the product team and managed the ECM platform. So not the client applications, but the core platform for ECM. As part of that, I also manage our Community Edition product and our open source strategy around that. And we have been doing a series of Alfresco Day events with developer tracks, which attract a lot of new Alfresco developers. So Greg Milan, one of our chief architects, and Oli and I put together a presentation for new developers, and we thought we got to get this thing recorded. So Oli invited me to come and present that today.
Yeah, and we've been getting a lot of requests to record the sessions at the Alfresco Days, and we're still working out a good way to handle that, because managing the recordings and everything is just a lot of work, and yeah, we're not quite sure if it's the right format. But one thing that we want to try out is to bring people on Tech Talk Live and have them come up and give their presentation, and we'll have a night recording and people can ask questions live and everything, so that's good. So before we dig into today's topic, I have a few announcements. The first one is that, oh, Richard, you should do that one about the next Community Edition.
Yes, so the June release of Community Edition is scheduled for next week, and it's going to be our first EA release. We completed the 5.1 series, and this is going to have new development for 5.2. The new development are new REST APIs in the platform side. Last year we separated Share and the rest of Alfresco from an architectural perspective, and we're going to take advantage of that with this release. So Share will be a 5.1 release that you could put in the May release of Community Edition, the May distribution of Community Edition, in order to take advantage of those bug fixes. But the platform does have new APIs.
Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to getting that out. And if you're not sure about the REST APIs and what that is all about, then go check out Tech Talk Live from January with Gavin Conwell. I can't remember the episode number, 92, 93, something like that, because that's where we really discuss the work we're doing on APIs. And we'll be back with more information about the APIs.
And you can test it out in the nightly builds.
Exactly. Apart from the Community Edition release going out next week, we are planning Tech Talk Live in a few weeks from now. So we will do a Tech Talk Live about the new app development framework we've been working on. So that's the Angular 2 based set of components that we're working on. We're planning on opening up the repositories next week, and we'll do a Tech Talk Live the week after. So that will be the week of the 4th of July. We haven't nailed the date yet, but it will probably not be a Wednesday, because we need to have everyone's calendars aligned. But we'll come up with a date shortly on doing that. But we'll make some announcement next week when we open up the repositories and everything. So I think that's about it for the announcement. Oh, there's one more thing that I wanted to say, which is we had BCon. That's over a month ago. Time is really flying by. So BCon was a great event. It was really good to see all of you guys there. We have recordings of a lot of the sessions at BCon. Unfortunately, we lost some of the recordings, like John Newton's keynote session and Thomas DeMeo's roadmap presentation. We lost those recordings, unfortunately, but we do still have a lot of recordings, and I have the devices with me. I have extracted all the recordings, and I'm just working on exporting it. Currently, we have almost all of them exported, but I have 3 videos that are really causing a lot of pain, where some of the frames are corrupt, and it's just a pain to deal with. So I may just upload the ones that I have to get them out, and then seek help to get the last of them done. So definitely look forward to getting that out. Hopefully I'll make it this weekend. So anyways. And
one other note for, hopefully this topic is going to be seen by a lot of new Alfresco developers and find it on YouTube. So if you're finding this on YouTube, it's being part of our monthly Alfresco Tech Talk Live series. And you can find it at alfresco.com/events/web events. You can see the schedule. And if you join live, you can participate in the IRC channel and the chat channel to ask questions at chat.alfresco.com. So yeah, hopefully people join in the future.
Yep. So today's session is all about getting started. Richard, you did this at the Alfresco Day in New York and San Francisco, and I reviewed the deck and I helped you put some of the slides together. So I think it's a great starting place. And we haven't done a proper introduction kind of Tech Talk Live in a long time. A lot of things changed, so we want to make sure we have a great venue for new developers to go check out the recording of this video and get up to speed. So Richard, I'll hand it over to you, and I'll be monitoring the questions. And I can say already now we've had some comments on my penguin and bees and your bee, so people are really enthusiastic about that. So I will go on mute and hand it over to you, Richard.
Excellent. So yes, thank you for your friend that made me a bee. So for our Order of the Bee mascot. Let me do my screen share. So this presentation does take about an hour. Feel free to ask questions as you go, but I might not go into much detail. The goal really is to start development with Alfresco and to bring people into the basic beginner position. So it is definitely a crash course. We're going to go through a lot of stuff fairly quickly, and the hope is that we don't leave anybody behind. But the slides will be posted on SpeakerDeck, and the recording will be posted on YouTube, and I spend lots of time pointing to links in the documentation. So you can think about it this way. We're going to give a 10,000-foot overview. So, but it can be hard to navigate. Crossing that line from the 10,000-foot overview to being on the ground is a challenge. So the hope is that I'm giving enough signposts that you can identify where you are in the documentation and where to get the help you need to be successful. So that's definitely the goal for today. And of course, the key place to go for resources is docs.alfresco.com. That's the documentation site's improved quite a bit over the last few releases. In fact, it's organized differently than when I took this screenshot 12 weeks ago. And in the documentation, you're going to find a lot of the information you need to get started with Alfresco development. So for all you experienced people out there, hopefully you'll find some interesting stuff that I'll point you to. But this today is definitely for the newbies. And I'm sorry to disappoint Sujay, but there's no demo today. This is all where stuff is in the docs. So let's go through that. For those who don't know what Alfresco is, it's an enterprise content management and business. Alfresco, the software product, is an enterprise content management platform. Alfresco, the company, also delivers a business process management platform called Activity, and Alfresco, the ECM product, embeds Activity to be able to do some workflow processes. And so we want to provide this platform to allow people to solve their business problems and build applications that make their business more efficient. So this slide has been around for a very long time. Our marketing team is tired of it, but I find it very useful to give a brief introduction to how Alfresco is architected. And Angel says that he has given feedback on docs.alfresco.com, but he's never received a response. So all that feedback goes into Jira that ends up in the work queue of the docs team. And I have watched them review that feedback, and we've discussed some of Angel's feedback. The docs team is supposed to respond. They don't always respond to every piece of feedback individually, but they do make the changes and publish them. And I can give feedback to the team that they should respond more directly. But we have been responding to the feedback that's given. So at the bottom of each page in the docs site, there's a feedback form, and we do act on that quite quickly. So
we do respond. So, and I even get CC'd on all the feedback when anyone sends anything into the form. So I know it's well used, but we'll definitely pass on that feedback that we need to do a better job at responding and giving personal feedback. But you also have to appreciate that we get a lot of feedback, so responding to everything may not always be possible, but we'll definitely pass on the feedback.
Yeah, and I see a few other people chiming in that they don't get feedback either, though Sujay got feedback once, so that's nice. And I know Douglas did once because I made sure that happened when he Skyped me and said, "Where's my feedback?" So hopefully it'll all. So we'll give that information to the team. Thanks for letting us know. Thanks for bringing it up, Angel. Okay, so this is the Alfresco architecture. Alfresco provides a content repository that really has three main pieces, and I'm going to move pretty quickly through this. But we store the content on the file system. Any network store, any file store you can attach to your operating system, we can put the content on. You attach Alfresco to a relational database system that tracks metadata and audit logs and permissions and things like that. And then there's an indexing service that handles the indexes and the categories. We use Solr for that in the latest versions of Alfresco. And so it's a standard Java application, and it provides a lot of protocols and APIs by which you can interact with that core Alfresco repository. So our main collaboration application is Share. We also have mobile applications. They talk through the public APIs. Well, they talk through the APIs. Not all of them are public. And then there are the REST APIs and CMS APIs. We'll talk about those in more detail. But the summary is there's a standard Java Alfresco process that runs in a Java container. We use Tomcat to serve that. And then it stores the content on the file system, uses Solr for the search, and it puts a bunch of stuff in the database. We don't recommend you play with the storage, the search, or the database directly. We highly recommend you use the APIs that makes those transactions safe and scalable. So with that brief introduction to Alfresco's architecture, as a developer, you probably have a question of, I want to achieve a goal. And so in the documentation, you go to either the community or the Alfresco 1 docs. They're largely the same. And in there, there's a developer guide. And the first page of that developer guide has this list of questions. I want to do A, and so here's the page that addresses it. And this goes quite a bit longer. This screenshot is just the first, fill. Scrolls down quite a bit. So that's a great place to go to get your foot into the documentation and into the various things we're going to do. And we're going to talk about these in more detail now. So when you're building for Alfresco, there's three basic ways to think about using Alfresco to solve a problem. And the first is, before you whip out code, you should say, what can I accomplish without coding anything? What can I do through configuration? And here's some of the tools you can use to configure Alfresco to meet your business needs. It's surprising what you can get done just with a good information architecture. By being really careful to think through how your organization or your client's organization uses content, you can divide that content into folders and into sites in Share. You can classify that content into various types to say this is an invoice, or this is a receipt, or a bill of materials. By putting things in appropriate places and attaching permissions to that, you can meet a lot of your business needs. Another part of Alfresco, really easy way to make Alfresco productive for your organization is through templates, document templates. And I think this is an underused feature of Alfresco. But when you're in the document library in Alfresco, you can say create new content of type whatever, and you upload a Word document or a spreadsheet or some other pre-filled document into Alfresco as a template. And then you can use that template to create new content of that type. It copies it into the location where you're creating the content, into the folder, and you can have your basic standard operating procedure form, or your basic lab analysis test form that way. So really easy to set up. Your business users can set it up using whatever document creation office suite they like, put it in as a template in Alfresco, and then other people can pull that in as the basis for their content. Alfresco's content modeling is probably the key thing that says this is real enterprise content management. To be able to say, to be able to divide your documents and your content into different types and give those types specific properties you're going to track. And in 5.1, the model manager is available there's a GUI-based model manager you can use to create those. So it used to be done in all XML. In 5.1, there's a GUI for it, but you can still massage it with XML. And that model manager lets you customize Alfresco to your organization. Also, Alfresco Share has the ability to edit each folder and attach a content rule. And what a content rule does is it says when content goes into a site or into a folder, or when it's updated or deleted, then do something smart. And that might be give it a specific type that you've modeled in your content model. It might be run a script that you've uploaded, move it somewhere else, set a property, those sorts of things. Now
So,
in 5.1, go ahead, Oli.
Angel has a question about the model manager, if there are any plans to go back and revisit and add new features to the model manager.
There are definitely plans to do that. We don't plan to make significant changes in the next release of Alfresco. We want it to be out there in the wild for a little bit longer and for us to get feedback on how it gets used in the real world. And then we need to go back and channel that feedback into improving that interface. So in 5.1, Alfresco has the ability to do smart folders. And what a smart folder is it's a query you attach to a folder that allows you to surface content in that folder anywhere that content is in the repository. So you can say, show me all documents related to a specific customer. And those documents might be spread out in different sites or different folders. Some might be invoices, some might be support cases, but they'll all show up in a single folder. And smart folders show up as true folders in the repository, so they're available from the mobile apps and all the different APIs and protocols. And they're configured with JSON. So I was calling that configuration more than development. We don't currently have a GUI for that, but you upload your JSON file and it says, here's the query that I want to attach, and then you assign that to that smart folder template to a folder in the repository. And it also allows for smart uploads. You can say when content is dragged into the smart folder, then it should be put into this part of the repository and automatically receive this metadata. So it's a very nice way to do automatic filing. Also, Activity, our workflow engine, the standalone Activity provides a very nice designer for drag and drop workflow creation. It allows you to model business processes that way. The enterprise designer has a lot more templates than the open source version, but both do. You have to install it alongside Alfresco and build this stuff and then import it into the ECM product, but it does provide a lot of nice capabilities for modeling those business processes. Alfresco supports a variety of protocols. We'll talk about those in a moment. The mobile applications also have the ability to add a user profile. So that's an XML file that you upload in the repository. And when the mobile app attaches that repository, it says this person only needs to see these parts of the mobile application. So it allows you to customize the interface of the mobile application in a very configuration-friendly way. And finally, Alfresco supports replication, where you move a directory replicated directory between repositories. And the enterprise product has hybrid sync to be able to keep two directories synchronized between Alfresco on-premise and Alfresco in the cloud. And that can allow you to build some topologies that address some very interesting problems for collaboration across the firewall or between sites. So, and that's all accessible through the GUI. Any other quick questions on configuration tools that can be used to solve business problems in Alfresco?
Nothing's come up. I've checked both the Google Plus page, and I see there were some comments around the model manager, but it's mostly feedback that's useful for us to pass back into product management and take that feedback and put it in a backlog. So yeah, I think we're good.
Excellent. We definitely enjoy feedback that somebody else has to respond to. So
that's the best kind.
Yes, though I jest. So Alfresco does support a variety of out-of-the-box protocols, and these make it really easy for any application to talk to Alfresco. So any third-party application or desktop system can mount Alfresco as a web drive or as a network drive using CIFS. Alfresco Office Services allows Alfresco to appear as a SharePoint server. And so you can get into, when you're using Microsoft Office, anywhere it says collaborate using SharePoint, you can point out that at Alfresco and be able to use Alfresco to manage those documents. There's an FTP interface. You can add Alfresco to a mail client over IMAP, and you can email content into Alfresco. And so each of those protocols expose the folder views of Alfresco. And so all these configuration approaches we discussed a moment ago can be coupled with those protocols to do some very smart things. I've long argued that most users of Alfresco don't know they're using Alfresco. They're just using a network drive, and they think they're saving it to their file system, but in reality ends up in Alfresco and gets automatic metadata and long-term archiving and all these benefits without the user knowing anything about it because of the way that Alfresco is set up in their environment. So the second approach is, you've done your configuration, you made people happy, but hey, there are specific needs we need to meet that we can't meet through configuration. And so at this point we say, hey, out of process, let's code something that interacts with Alfresco. And you probably want, if possible, to do this in an out of process way, a separate application that's going to use the public APIs to get into Alfresco. And these remote APIs, we call this an integration point. And so when you go to the documentation, you can see those integration points listed, but it allows you to access Alfresco content services from your application or from a third-party application. There is an industry standard for this called CMIS, Content Management Interoperability Services, and you can find CMIS libraries in a lot of languages. And of course, we also have public REST APIs that support Alfresco specific capabilities, and we have a mobile SDK that wraps Android and iOS calls to make it easy to build applications specific for those platforms. So our REST API is pretty standard REST. CMIS is the OASIS standard for REST in content management spaces. CMIS also supports SOAP. And there's two profiles for CMIS. You can do the Atom XML, or you can do JSON. And just show some examples of the different services you can access, sites, favorites, tasks, people. Those are all things that aren't provided by the CMIS industry standard version, but are available through our public API. In our next release of Alfresco, and as Oli mentioned in our next community edition release, we've expanded our public REST API to overlap with CMIS in some key ways related to managing documents. The goal here is to make it easier to learn and a bit more performant than CMIS gives. So if you want to do things in an industry standard way that works across multiple content repositories, then we highly recommend you use CMIS. If you're worried about that being too heavyweight, then you can use the new Alfresco native REST APIs to do a lot of those same things. The mobile SDKs are available on GitHub for both iOS and Android. They provide a lot of wrappers over the standard REST APIs to make it easy to build your own application. And of course, our open source mobile apps are open source. That makes it easy to customize those for your environment as well, or to see how they use the SDK to learn from. And here's the documentation where we say you go to the community documentation, the developer guide, platform integrations, and in the platform integration points, you can see that list of APIs that are accessible from a third-party application or from an out-of-process application. Any questions on integration points? Moving pretty fast.
There's a few comments on the collaborate with SharePoint or via SharePoint. Axel notes that we might want to be a bit careful about how we word it. So it won't just work anywhere. There's a lot of proprietary things going on. So a lot of integration applications may have direct things where it doesn't use the standards protocols for SharePoint and use private APIs and whatnot. So he lists some examples of how that might fail. So, but one of the things that is mainly useful in is when you're in Alfresco inside here, you can click the Edit Online button, and it just launches the Word document or the Excel document or whatever it is, and you have that directly open. You can edit it and just click Save, and it's saved directly back, and you can handle the versioning and everything. So that's some really nice features. But I do agree, there will be edge cases on it, of course.
Yeah, and in Alfresco 5.0 and 5.1, we've replaced our SharePoint integration, our old VTI module, with what we call AOS, Alfresco Office Services. And it's a much more complete implementation, so I feel a lot more comfortable saying that when you're in the Microsoft Office applications, anywhere you say collaborate with SharePoint, you can put Alfresco in there, and it seems to work pretty well. When it hasn't worked, we report that as a bug and we try to address it. It does not work with Office 365 yet. We're still working on that support. But for on-premise Microsoft Office, it works pretty good. I see Axel's specific concern was over a third-party application that had SharePoint integration. And yeah, we haven't tested with those as much as we have with Microsoft Office. Yep. So diving into the, and Bindu reports Office on the Mac, concerns with Office on the Mac. I thought we'd address those, but I guess we'll have to look into that again. So the third approach is, you've configured Alfresco quite a bit. You have built the, any third-party applications that you need, you've integrated through the REST APIs, but you still need to modify the way Alfresco works itself. You need to get in and do an in-process modification to Alfresco. The documentation refers to these as extension points, and there's two important tiers to this. There's the repository tier, which gets you into the core repository with the content models. You can do that in the Java API. There's a JavaScript API for server-side JavaScript, and we use FreeMarker for our templating. Or there's the share tier, and share is our collaboration interface that gets shipped with Alfresco. And so there are two parts of that. There's the SpringSurf API, and there's the Aikau widget API. So the Java API on the repository side allows you to inject code into Alfresco that gets run within the Alfresco process. And Alfresco has a service registry, which is an index of all the classes all the services that a class can use, and you can put your own stuff into there. And we organize the different public API extension points as various services. So examples are the action service, which lets you add an aspect, the file folder service, which lets you work with individual files and folders, or the workflow service. There's also the person service. There's a lot of services. You deploy these Java extensions is either a repository AMP or a jar module you put on the class path. So an AMP is an Alfresco module package, and it gets overlaid using a tool called the MMT tool, the module management tool. The repository also supports server-side JavaScript, and it has a pretty decent JavaScript debugger that runs server-side that lets you step through your code. This JavaScript can either be deployed in an AMP, or it can be put in the repository itself. So it allows you to make some nice customizations without having to have a full Java development environment. And you can access most of the services through JavaScript, but not all of them. There's some things you can only do from Java. So there's some root node objects pointing to the current document in the company home, as well as various services that you can call. And I already mentioned how things get deployed. So you can put them on the file system, or you can put them into the data dictionary. And these scripts in the data dictionary can also be plugged into the content rules I mentioned earlier, so they get run automatically when content gets manipulated within the repository. And then, as I mentioned, we use FreeMarker for templating. It's a fairly decent Java templating engine and allows you to format your responses. So one of the most common requests of Alfresco is, I need to get all of my content related to whatever, and it needs to be returned in a specific XML format that I need to integrate with this very niche standard. And we don't have out-of-the-box templates for all that, but it's very easy to write a template that says, do a search on the repository and format everything that comes back in a specific way. So that's what FreeMarker is really useful for. And there's specific methods to be able to check what gets returned and manipulate within the template. And SpringSurf API is, so moving on to the next tier is the share tier. And share divides things into two pieces. Surf prepares pages to be returned, and Aikau composes the pages in the browser. So the SpringSurf API lets you build web components on that presentation tier. And Surf also uses a JavaScript API and a FreeMarker templating. And it has some root node objects. What's nice about Surf is that you don't have to restart the server when you're changing components. And Aikau, as I mentioned, lets you compose things within the browser. So you can build your web UI that leverages Alfresco and share. The widgets are written with JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. We embed Dojo widgets, but you can put other widgets into Aikau as well. Share gets a bit messy because it's a mixture of Aikau, which is the new pages and the new way of doing things, and some old UI stuff, and even older JSPs. So unfortunately, Share is a very large and mature app at this point, and there's some cruft in there that you have to work around when you're modifying Share. But Aikau is the cleanest way to extend it. There's a tutorial on GitHub is linked at the bottom of this slide. And all the source code's on GitHub. So when you're building, when you're looking at extending Alfresco, you have this key decision where you have to say, am I customizing, how much do I need to customize Share versus building my own application? So, Share is a knowledge collaboration app. And if you're doing if you're just working as a team on whatever topic comes up, Share meets that need pretty well out of the box. That's the way we use it on our team internally. But the other side of the spectrum is, I just want to do one thing, and I don't want to bother my users with anything else except for that one thing, and I want it to be presented in a very specific way, in which case you need to write a custom application. And in between, you might be doing more focused collaboration where you're going to configure Share to have sites in specific setups. You can turn pieces of Share off, pieces of Share sites out, so that you only see a document library or you only see a wiki. Or you might need to put a custom page into Share so that you can do a custom task alongside your general collaboration. Not every user needs every feature of Share, and if you sit down and say, oh, I'm going to spend all this time turning pieces of Share off, then you're probably better off working with the repository directly and building a custom application using the APIs instead of trying to go in and make Share match your needs, your use case. But at the same time, if you start off and say, we really need the Share document library, and we really need the previewer, and we really need, wikis and favorites and quick share links, at that point, staying within Share will probably save you more time than trying to build something on your own. So in order to make this easier, one of our focuses this year has been to increase time to value, make it easier for you to get from a new development, new installation to something productive for your users. And so one way we want to do that is to build a common app framework. And Oli's been working hard with his team on this, with the engineering team on this. We want it to be easier to work with both the ECM platform and the Activity BPM platform. And so this app framework will provide a unified development approach on top of both. And we looked around and said, instead of making everybody learn our way of doing things with Aikau and with Share, we looked around and said, what is the most widely adopted JavaScript framework? And our research suggested that Angular is what we should be using. So we've taken Angular, and we've taken the Google Material Design Guidelines, and we've adapted the material design for Alfresco. and started to build Alfresco specific Angular widgets, Angular web components that you can use in your own applications. And our goal is within the next few months, few could be quite a few, to be able to provide a library of these components that you can put into your own application. And these are designed to be mobile first. They're designed to be very modern and easy to use. And because they're web components, they can be embedded into a lot of different things. Now, that doesn't mean that we're giving the Aikau is deprecated. Aikau is still core in Share. Both Share and our records management interface depend on Aikau. And so we're continuing to develop Aikau for those use cases. But we aren't going to, our focus is no longer on making Aikau a general development platform. We did that for a while, and the feedback we got was that the learning curve is much higher than being able to hire somebody who already knows Angular. So if you're building your own thing, we suggest you use the common application the unified application framework, assuming that your timeline matches the pace at which we're building things.
So just to add some color to it, and just one correction,
yep.
you said that it was web components. That's not true. It is Angular components, but we will we'll be discussing all of this in more detail 2 weeks from now when we do Tech Talk Live on the app development framework. So be sure to tune in and get all the juicy details. But just to give the gist of it, we're talking about 3 layers of usefulness. So one layer, the bottom layer, would be a JavaScript API where you can pull that in, and that will handle all the authentication, all the communication through the REST APIs, and give you a nice front end and on top of the APIs to really work against the repository. So you don't have to worry about how do you call this API, what parameters does it take. You have to care about the JavaScript API. On top of that, we built some logic to care for things like, oh, we need to build a list, we need to handle sorting, we need to handle pagination, we need to handle breadcrumbs, all these kind of things. And on the 3rd level, we will have the fully fledged, ready-to-use components. So if you have an Angular app, you can pull in a document library widget, and you can pull that in and drop that into your page, and you have everything up and running. So you decide how what level you want to engage with it, but there's a lot more detail in, and be sure to check in a few weeks when we discuss the details and open the doors for this.
Yeah, and thanks for the clarifications, Uli. And one of the long-term goals is to be able to make it so you can take these these Angular 2 widgets and access them from within Share, so you can take advantage of some of the new things if you need to customize Share. As Bindu points out, that does increase the complexity of Share yet again, because the Share already has 3 layers of historical code in it. But Share isn't meant to be an application development framework. It's meant to be a collaboration app that you might need to customize lightly. If you need to go in and muck around a lot in Share, then the unified application framework is hopefully the easier way to do that in the near future.
And again, I see a lot of comments on this on RC, and just to recap, Aikau is not going anywhere. Share is not going anywhere. We're still going to support it. We're still going to continue to develop it. It is still a focus because it's a product that people extend and really use. So it's not going away. It's not being put to sleep or anything. So just want to make that absolutely clear. The second thing is we're using Angular 2 for the new framework, not Angular 1, just to be completely precise on it. But I don't want to steal the focus of your presentation, Richard. So save these questions for 2 weeks from now, and we'll have John on the show and everything, John Sotovopoulos. So we'll be answering all the questions around all of this in due time.
Yes, it definitely is a larger topic, and to be really upfront, we're collaborating with the community. We're talking with you about what's needed for what you need out of this process. And so we don't have all the answers yet. We're figuring things out as we go.
Yeah.
So, okay. So for the new developers, you can find all this information in the documentation, of course. Go to the developer guide, to the platform extensions, and the platform extension points. And all of the public methods that are expected that we're preserving backwards compatibility between releases for, between minor releases for, and that we expect people are using, they're all listed here. And again, there's multiple screenshots, pages of screenshots that you can go through and figure out how FreeMarker works and how the different APIs work. So let's review just for a second. So the Alfresco API architecture does end up being pretty complex. You have the repository in the bottom third of this slide. It's got the Java code and the repository web scripts. Those are calling into the public Java API that's built on top of the repository. You have the REST API and the industry CMIS standard that we're expecting everybody to use for integration points. And then you access all of these over the network from the mobile clients and different desktop clients, as well as from the Share web client. And Share's got a mixture of the older UE stuff and the newer Aikau stuff. And in the future, will be able to be composed with some of the unified app frameworks. And also in the future, we'll be having an additional box of the unified app framework widgets that can be used to build your own applications. So the REST API set, there are two basic sets of APIs. There's the remote ones where you can use the protocols, the mobile SDKs, or the REST API. And there's the embedded ones. Well, we talked about Java and JavaScript for both the repository tier and the user interface, the share tier. You can use those to extend and customize Alfresco. So for new developers, I think it's useful to think about this similar to the way you would design a web application. Most people, in a college class will design a web app. You've got your database on the back end where you're sticking all the data, and you have a CMS front end where your user is going to interact with that data. And that's very similar to the way an Alfresco solution gets built, where Alfresco provides a content repository where your content lives, and it's organized into content models that you can think of similar to a database schema to divide things into the different information you attach to each document. And sometimes you say, I need to modify this database to be able to do things in a very performant way or to be able to manipulate my data in a specific way. Alfresco web scripts allows you to do that on the repository. So you can use those embedded APIs and expose your content in specific ways. And then on the front end, the user interface, you have a back end side where you're composing your pages, and then you have a front end side where you're rendering those pages in the browser. And so Surf puts the pages together and gets them delivered, and Aikau in Share renders them in the browser. And of course, in the new world, you could also do that with a back-end framework like Node and a front-end framework like Angular 2. Now, every analogy has its limits. This analogy is not perfect, but it helped me to understand how Alfresco fits into the environment of a business solution. So, any questions on what we've covered up till now?
Not specifically. There's a lot of questions around Share and Aikau and Angular and how this all ties in together, but I'll save all of these questions for the next Tech Talk Live.
Yes, John's going to come with a list of questions before he even starts talking.
Yeah.
So, beauty. So a few more details. We do provide a specific lifecycle for our public APIs. So the remote APIs are independently versioned. They're backwards compatible, and so the V1 remote APIs will remain the same even in Alfresco 6.0 or 7.0 in the future, whenever that happens. We would come and say we would deprecate the V1 remote APIs when a V2 remote API system is ready, but you could still call V1 to keep your integration stable until it gets removed, and we would advertise that a few releases in advance, etc. The embedded APIs, those stay the same within a major version family. So in the 5X family, the embedded APIs are kept the same, and we've built some automated testing to manage that, to be able to detect when we've broken that contract, and so we can address it. And we call that the backwards compatibility kit. Authentication for the remote APIs is done through HTTP basic auth on premise, and for Alfresco in the cloud, we use OAuth. We have not put OAuth into the on-premise product yet. We've been evaluating that. If that's something that your organization needs, please let me know. And embedded extensions of Alfresco, they rely on the Alfresco authentication. So when you're building web scripts and things, you can specify whether this is only available to authenticated users or not. So that's a quick whirlwind overview, the crash course in Alfresco APIs. And let's take a closer look at just the embedded stuff, and specifically the SDK, the software development kit we put together to make it easier to do embedded development. And again, we won't have time to demo it as part of this conversation. We've only got 15 minutes left, but I want to give you the signposts necessary for you to start building on your own. So there's some key tools when you're building an Alfresco extension. We talked about the APIs, but I think it's useful to think about how these APIs get combined into building a solution. So Alfresco uses Maven as the software delivery system for developers. So we have an artifacts repository that you can pull everything you need. You package your extensions as amps, Alfresco module packages, or jars on the class path. And as I mentioned, amps get installed, get overlaid on the WAR using a tool, the MMT tool. And then Alfresco lets you extend itself by, you can create custom REST APIs by building web scripts. It allows you to inject your own APIs into the repository. And a web script is simply a JavaScript or Java controller, an XML descriptor, which tells you what the endpoint's going to be, and a FreeMarker template that lets you format your result. And most of the extensions of Alfresco are built using web scripts. And so when you're building things, you can build an action. An action lives in the, you can see actions in the interface on the right-hand side of the document preview or the document page in the document library. They let you manipulate the content by triggering it. So the user generates a trigger to an action. So it's things like convert to PDF or archive this as a record, and you can build your own actions as well. Behaviors are similar in that they manipulate content, but they're triggered by the content itself. So the most common behavior you see in the product is the versioning behavior. When something new is uploaded, take the old one and store it as a version, and then create a new version for the new content. And Alfresco also has transformers where you convert content from one MIME type to another. There's a bunch that are out of the box, but you can build your own. We use LibreOffice to do most of our transformations and most of our document transformations, and ImageMagick to do most of our image transformations. So, and you can write your own as well with some XML and then Java to call out to the transformer. Alfresco also knows to extract content from various pieces of, from specific MIME types, extract metadata from specific MIME content. We use Apache Tika to do that, and so it knows how to go into like a JPEG and pull out all the EXIF data and store that in the content model where it's easy to find. And Alfresco uses Quartz to schedule jobs, and testing is done using Selenium WebDriver. And you'll see examples in a lot of the Alfresco SDK that shows you how to leverage Selenium to do tests of the interface. So the SDK pulls these things together in a way that makes it easy to get started development. So it provides 3 specific Maven archetypes: a repo amp, a share amp, and an all-in-one. It provides all the config necessary to make this work. It includes some Maven plugins so that Maven can be smart with Alfresco. It uses H2 as an in-memory database, so you don't have to set up any of that. It includes Tomcat to serve everything. It pulls from Community Edition by default. You can get it to pull the Enterprise Edition stuff with a username and password you can get from support. And it uses Spring Loaded to be able to hot reload. There's some challenges with that in the latest version due to security vulnerability. But it uses Spring Loaded where it can. And it also provides a Git repository full of sample code. So basically, to get started is you install Maven, And if you're an Eclipse person, you can install Eclipse and you put Spring Loaded down onto your class path if you want to do that, if you want to use Spring Loaded. You create a new project. You need to make sure it's an Alfresco specific project. So there's a specific catalog you need to add. And then say, do your thing. And it goes and does its thing. And you have everything needed to build your extension. And you can run it and change it and not reload it most of the time. I think that using the command line helps me understand what's going on in the background. And there's some key Maven commands that are useful to understand. You can use Maven goal with a profile. So you can say, I want to do an integration test using amp to war. You can package, you can install, you can clean. And once you have things working the way you want, you can then export them to Eclipse to use that debugger if you're interested. So a few quick cautions, and I'm going kind of fast because we are running out of time. Maven does download a lot of stuff, so just understand that. You need to do some memory configuration stuff. The SDK in its current form is specific to a version of Alfresco. And so you need to make sure you get the right version of the SDK for the version of Alfresco you're using. And there's a compatibility matrix in the documentation. I see the link didn't go through. And I'll try and fix that before I upload my slides. And when you upgrade Alfresco, you need to upgrade the SDK. Upgrading the SDK isn't terrible once you know what you're doing. And so we've tried to document all the steps. It doesn't take a very long time, but it can be a pain to figure out on your own. So for each version, we've documented the upgrade path. And if you go to the documentation and follow those steps, it works pretty cleanly.
And just to add some color to this, the date today is June 22nd, and if you're watching this later than June 22nd, 2016, you should be able to get your hands on SDK 3.0, which will address all of these issues. So development has begun, everything is fleshed out, and we're actively developing on SDK 3.0. So look forward to that. We'll have some announcement on that within the next couple of months.
Yes, thank you, Oli. I had a slide on that, but I took it out because of time considerations. But I do mention that the current release is 2.2.0, and it does have some specific limitations. It was just minimal fixes to get things to work in 5.1. As Oli said, we're working on 3.0 to do more fundamental changes. And so the limitations include that Spring Loaded only works with share. It doesn't work with the repo. That's due to a Java vulnerability in Apache in one of the Apache libraries Spring Loaded uses that Alfresco's helpfully protecting you against, even though in a development environment, you don't always need that. We are still adding samples and tests for the extension points, but you'll see a bunch are already there. And there's no jar archetype. It only does amps. But there's an example of how to build a jar in the samples section. And of course, it only supports Alfresco 5.1 because every version of the SDK is related to a specific version of Alfresco. So with that quick introduction, if you go to the SDK site in GitHub, the SDK project in GitHub, there's a great YouTube video that shows you how to get started. And so you can go through that video. Oli put the video together, and it's really useful. There's also the documentation and the sample site at Alfresco SDK samples. Other useful resources you should know about, of course, is Tech Talk Live. There's a whole playlist of stuff. There's a specific one for the SDK. Our friend Jeff Potts, his blog has a pretty good tutorial on the SDK. And there's also, for general development items, there's a developer blog. So if you go to blogs.alfresco.com in the staff blogs area, the Alfresco developer blog has a lot of great information. It's where you get the latest information about Aikau, about share development. Hopefully the developer tools team starts blogging about the unified app framework. Have you got a blog post up on that yet, Oli?
No, we will put all of that out next week. We're working hard towards opening the doors. Excellent.
So anyway, lots of good stuff in that developer blog. We also have some tools that can be very useful. The Aikau sandpit lets you go in and play around with any Aikau widget very cleanly without having to have your own environment. The API Explorer is fairly new. We've been using Swagger to define our API, and the API Explorer lets you go through and browse those definitions using the open API spec and be able to play with those different API endpoints without having to set up an environment. So all the REST stuff is really clean to play with at api-explorer.alfresco.com.
And
there are
the API Explorer is also bundled along with the SDK. So if you're running Alfresco within the SDK, you have the API Explorer available locally. So it's a great artifact.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's cool. And then the developer forums, forums.alfresco.com, are a great resource to be able to get help from other volunteers who are interested in working with you. And Alfresco does provide quite a bit of training. You can purchase that at university.alfresco.com, and if you go to, you can browse the courses in the developer role. And Alfresco has 2 certifications for professionals: the ACE, the Alfresco Certified Engineer, and the ACA, the Alfresco Certified Administrator. So you should consider taking those tests and proving that you know your stuff. Many of our clients only hire people with those certifications, and most of our partners have requirements to hire people with those certifications or make sure their staff is certified. So that is the rapid fire crash course to Alfresco development and getting started. Hopefully I didn't lose too many people. I will be posting the slides once I've figured out why the PDF doesn't have the links, and make those available to everybody. So any questions in the 4 minutes we have left?
There was a couple. I just have to, lots of conversation going on over the last couple of minutes. Bindu asked about where we can find examples of how to use Selenium with the SDK, and there's 2 answers to that. One is the archetype by default includes, at least the all-in-one archetype include a Selenium-based test, so you can, and that's a raw test based on Selenium written in Java. So that's one example. The other one is to go to the Alfresco SDK samples, so github.com/alfresco-SDK-samples, and you'll find a bunch of new testing in there. We did a lot of work with some frameworks called Jeb and Spock, with really some Groovy-based languages or frameworks, which really makes it easy to go in and write up Selenium-based tests. So definitely go check that out. There was another comment, just looking for it here on Bindu had a point about actions. Bindu wrote, there are 2 very different things called actions. It would be good to explain that to new developers. I assume there's more to that story.
So, really quick before we talk about actions, I also want to mention on the using Selenium to test with the SDK that we did, Michael Suzuki did a Tech Talk Live on that about a year ago, and it is in the playlist. I removed the link because it was, I already had 3 slides first full of links, but I don't remember the number, but it was fall of 2014, maybe it was a year and a half ago, but it basically, it still works. I used his Tech Talk Live recently to prep.
Okay, and Bindu says that repository actions versus share actions, and indeed those are 2 very distinct things. So if you're doing an action in share, we're talking about the drop down you have on the right-hand side where you can add in new actions, exactly, new buttons of functionality. That's an action in share, and on the repository you can create actions that can be executed on nodes. So they're kind of related, but still very 2 distinct things. But this is all covered in the documentation. So if you go into the developer section in the developer guide, you'll find on the platform you can find actions, and on the share you can find action as well, and that will correctly show you the difference on how to do these things. But it's a great point that these are 2 very distinct things, and you can get confused by it.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for the clarification, Bindu.
I think that is, let me just check, we're almost on top of the hour, and just checking that Google+, no questions there. And I think we covered most of the questions that came in through IRC. So Sujay asks if we will have the results for the developer survey. I'm not sure if you're talking about who won the competition or if we got the results. I can say that we got the results and we're extremely happy about the participation. I will be initiating a second round of surveys, so I have some more in-depth questions about how our customers and developers are extending share. So we will need to have some more in-depth questions about that, and there will be a sweet prize for that as well. But we've had a lot of people respond to the survey, so that made me really, really happy. We're blown away by that, by the results of that. And I don't believe we have found a winner just yet, but we'll be sure to announce it when we get close.
Last I spoke with the marketing team, they hadn't, what was it, 3 weeks ago? They had compiled all the results, but they hadn't actually drawn a name yet. So we do need to do that. I should ask the IRC crowd at chat.alfresco.com, would you be interested in us presenting to you on the results of the developer survey? We've done that in previous years and got mixed feedback on whether it was valuable. Should that be a Tech Talk Live topic? And of course, we got to wait 45 seconds. For
we have the lag and delay and everything. So so we say this and then we have to wait for people to respond. There's always a bit of delay. I think it would be useful, and I would probably say that we announced the winner alongside with a follow-up survey and say that if you didn't win, then you'll have a second chance. I'm not saying that I can get budget for a second Oculus Rift, but I'll make sure that we have a sweet prize.
And Bindu suggests maybe a blog post instead of a Tech Talk Live, and I think that's a pretty good suggestion. Also, so full disclosure, I'm going to add the note to my slides about repo versus share actions. So if you look at the slides, it'll have that note.
And Axel calls shotgun on being the winner. I'm not sure it works that way, but I'll ask the marketing team if calling dips or yelling shotgun will change anything. And it sounds like we have. So that actually, I know we're all on top of the hour, Richard, but since I have you, what's up with office hours and what's happening in that space?
We really need to start doing those again. That's about what's happening.
Bindu and Sujay suggested that presenting the developer survey results would be an office hour kind of thing, and I completely agree. It's not a technical topic; it's a more softer one, and office hours would be great. So one of the things I want to ask you guys is Richard, when you and Jeff started doing office hours, I was in the community, and I really loved just seeing you guys hang out and talk about whatever without having an overall agenda. And looking at my second screen, which is where I have IRC, to ask you guys if that's valuable, if that's something we need to bring back, just two guys hanging out and for an hour and discussing what's new, small things, life, universe, and everything, or if you want to continue having them in full-on presentation mode where we have a panel and everything, or maybe both. I mean, we're open for feedback and we're still trying to get this back on schedule. So definitely need some feedback. Anyways, we are 3 minutes past the hour and we have another call, and we don't want to keep people waiting. So leave us some feedback and we're happy to pick it up. But Richard, it was a really useful session. I hope that new developers can benefit from it. And I hope this is the start of us starting to invite more people up to Tech Talk Live to redo the sessions or present again, or just give people some more cover. So if you have a topic you want to cover on Tech Talk Live, then reach out to me or Richard or email community@alfresco.com, and we're more than happy to have a conversation with you guys. So without further ado, thank you so much for attending, and we will announce the date for the next one, which will be in the next Tech Talk Live, which will be in 2 weeks. So see you later.
It was fun. Thanks.